Thank you all for joining us today to hear a little bit. I'll give it one more second, just make sure. So, again, thank you all for joining us today while we talk a little bit about the score.org redesign and how we really focused on user experience from all angles, not just end users and site visitors, but administrators, in order to reinforce the Score brand and keep, sorry. I'm easily distracted, sorry guys. So I am going to kick this off. My name is Olivia Phillips. I'm the Director of User Experience at Phase 2. I have been in the digital space doing UX and what I call UX adjacent work for almost 20 years now, and have been at Phase 2 for the last 3.5. I'm going to hand it over to my colleague Jesse to talk a little bit about himself. Brings the technical perspective to all of this.
My name is Jesse. I'm a senior developer at Phase 2, and I'm on the growth and support team. So I was not around for the initial build of this project, and I didn't make any of the architectural decisions myself, but I've been working on it as the support engineer and team lead for 9 months or so. So I'm pretty familiar, and I'm here to sort of provide a resource if anyone has any technical questions about the architecture decisions.
Okay. Hello everyone, my name is Candace Stennett. I'm the Director of Marketing at Score, and I have been at Score for almost 8 years now in a variety of different roles that have really helped provide a lot of knowledge not only about the organization but about all of the users of our site, which really shaped and influenced the end product. To start, I'd like to tell you a little bit about Score. Score is a nonprofit resource partner of the U.S. Small Business Administration, or the SBA, as everybody calls them. We exist to help people in America start and grow small businesses. We do this through a number of different services. Our core service is our free one-on-one mentoring. This is available online or through one of our 320 plus chapters across the nation. We also offer low or no cost educational workshops and business roundtables to help provide information on business topics. And we have a library of free business tools, templates, blogs, articles, infographics, pretty much anything that you need to know about starting a small business. Since our inception in 1964, we have helped over 11 million people on their path to entrepreneurship. We have notable successes including Jelly Belly, Vera Bradley, and each year we average around 50,000 new businesses that we help create. So why is all of this important? It all feeds into our brand and who we are as an organization. We're people focused. Our whole business is people. With the exception of the 30 plus employees and contractors at our Herndon, Virginia headquarters, our whole organization is comprised of volunteers. Beyond that, we exist to serve small business owners. We are a contemporary organization, despite being founded over 50 years ago. We are keeping up with the times. We offer a number of online products. A lot of our mentoring is done by email, Skype, Google Hangout, Snapchat, pretty much any online technology that we can use to connect with our small business owners. We also offer a full schedule of weekly webinars. We offer virtual conferences. So we're really trying to keep current and contemporary. And our working style is helpful. And again, we're here to support other people in their success. This feeds into some of our business challenges going into the project. When we started our website redesign in 2015, we were on a Drupal 6 website that had been created back in 2012. So the website didn't really support our current needs, and it definitely didn't support the current brand. We had outdated technology. Because of the way the website was structured, we had very low conversion rates. Again, we measure conversion by looking at how many people visit the website and how many we get to consume either our mentoring or our workshop services. We weren't really happy with our brand recognition. If you looked at our website back then, we had our national website at www.score.org, and that looked one way with our current logo and messaging, but then if you visited one of our chapter sites, you'd see something completely different. They might have our older logo that we had from years ago, and old colors and different fonts and styles and messaging than what we were really encouraging them to use from the national office. Beyond that, as I mentioned, our organization is comprised of volunteers. So that meant whenever it came time to maintain their websites, we were relying on our volunteers to do that at the local level. So we had some chapters that had the human resources to be able to do that. They had a webmaster with a lot of technical expertise that would regularly go in and make updates. And then we had some chapters that didn't touch their sites for years, or they didn't have somebody in the webmaster role that even knew how to edit a website. So these were some of the challenges that we were faced with in designing the new site. So that brings us to 2015, where we decided we were well overdue for a redesign, and we did a full RFP process, reaching out to different firms, trying to figure out, is Drupal the right platform for us? Who's going to be our long-term partner in not only redesigning the site, but also in maintaining it for years to come?
We've partnered with Phase 2. So I was there in the very beginning of this in 2015, and so we were excited to work with SCORE. A lot of the people on the team before coming to Phase 2 had been freelancers or had their own businesses, and so a lot of people had used SCORE services. And so just as a company and as a group, we were really excited about the mission of SCORE and looking forward to help them help their users. And so where did we start? So this is a snapshot of the SCORE homepage in 2015 when we started working with SCORE. The reason I want to point this out is because it really illustrates one of the major usability issues that SCORE was having. And that's their navigation. So at this point, when we're looking here, each one of these topics off the main bar, business advice, startup, etc., those were also drop-down menus. So when you come to Score.org homepage, or actually any page on the site, because this is a global header, there are 54 options for an end user to choose from. And it really just, not only was it overwhelming and hard to figure out which option was relevant, but it really muddied what SCORE could do for an end user. So how did we fix this? We started with the discovery process, like all our projects, and like most of you probably do as well, in terms of really understanding what it was that SCORE wanted to accomplish, as well as what their users needed. We were fortunate in working with Candace and her team that they had already done a significant amount of research. They had personas, they had yearly surveys that they did with their clients to just see, kind of what they needed. So we didn't have to do a bunch of research to start. We could leverage what was done and work really closely with Candace to understand that. We also did a content assessment of the site just to see what it was that SCORE was offering, as well as an analytics review, looked at their Google Analytics, and of course workshops where we talked a lot. And one of the reasons I bring this up is it's sort of common sense, but I can never say it enough, is if you don't understand the problem you're trying to fix, you're not going to design the right solution. So it's really important to have an open collaboration with your client and them with you, and to build a trust and to listen to each other. So let me go here. So the next step, once we uncovered everything, was design. And so we started with building out the IA through the use of sitemaps. Also working very closely with SCORE to figure out, through all of this research and all of these audiences, who were the priority people we were trying to reach. And what we came up with is the number one audience we were trying to reach was the small business owner and the entrepreneur, with the second audience being their volunteers from an administrator standpoint. So in approaching the design, we really approached it from the national site first to really nail down sort of what that experience was, and then iterate on that to approach the chapters. So a lot of this, you're gonna see national site stuff, and then we're gonna get into the chapters, which I'm sure most people are anxious to hear more about. So what we came up with initially was really where we needed to go was to come up with a navigation scheme that was based primarily around SCORE's key services, which were the mentoring, the workshops and training they offered, as well as the vast library, is what we called it, of resources. They have advice, they have business planning, templates, all sorts of good stuff. So what we came up with was this primary navigation that said ask, learn, connect. And like any good designer, we had to validate this. And so we did tree jack testing to validate the IA. And we also had extensive stakeholder sessions with our other audience, which was the volunteer group, in terms of their needs and what they needed to be able to do to manage their sites moving forward. And this is what we came up with. So we found through testing, and this is why testing is important, that ask, learn, connect was just a little too obscure for people. They wanted something very direct, very clear. And that's where we came up with find a mentor, take a workshop, and browse the library, because that is essentially what SCORE has to offer. And as you can see, what we've done is we've taken 54 choices down to 8. And we'll talk more about success, but what this has really done for SCORE is also help reinforce the brand that I come here, it's a very clear what I can do on this site, and it's very clear what SCORE can do for me. So now that we've talked about navigation, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the content needs and the editor experience. So we talked a little, Candace talked a little bit about this. We had varying understanding of technology and ability to manipulate it, for lack of a better way to describe it, with our content editors. There were some that were very savvy and were like, oh, I can hand code all of this and I'm going to put in all these widgets, and there were others that were not and could barely update it. So we needed to come up with a way that those who had a little bit more experience had some flexibility to customize to meet their needs, but those who did not had a lot of resources just immediately available to them when the site switched over, to be able to keep the website up with minimal effort. And so we came up with this concept of the flexible content bands, which were on our landing page and homepage. And this was something that was beneficial to the national site administrators as well as the chapters, because from a national standpoint, you could easily switch out what the priority was at any given time and keep in line with the overall design and brand and not have to have any technical expertise. And how we did this, Jesse is going to talk a little bit about.
We use the paragraphs module, and that allows these content bands to be grouped together in a single entity. And that way it can be reordered on the page, and different types of paragraphs can be set up for different looks of the content bands. So you have different types of content bands that are represented on the back end as different paragraph types. And that's the module implementation.
Thank you. So, how did this apply to chapters? So I'm going to let Candace talk a little bit more about the chapter sites, as I flip through what they used to look like.
Sure. So I talked earlier about some of our business challenges, and these slides go to illustrate some of what you saw before the redesign. When we got started, we had a number of chapters that hated the old Drupal 6 template and said, I can't work with this. I don't have any flexibility. I want to present content in a different way. So these are just some examples of some of those sites that went off and did their own thing. You can see there's orange and red, and some people presented the chapter name next to the logo, to the right of it. Some people put it below. Some had that gradient in the header. Some kept their websites updated. There were some sites that hadn't been touched since 2012. So this is what we had to work with, and we had to find a way to convince these chapters to come on board and use the new template that we were redesigning so that we could present a unified brand to the small business audience while giving them the flexibility that they needed to customize it and present content in the way that felt right for them and their local market.
So before we get too much into sort of how we approach the keeping the brand in alignment, I want to hand it over to Jesse and Candace just to talk about the decisions that were made and how the entire site was set up to handle the chapters.
So in order to approach this project from an architectural point of view, there's some key questions because it really affects the implementation of how it's built on the back end. And some of these that were asked are, will content be shared between the different chapters? Can a page or workshop or resource exist on 2 or more different chapters? Will the local chapter content be displayed on the national site, or vice versa, the national content appearing on the chapters? Will the national editors be able to manage chapter sites? And will an editor for a chapter site be responsible for multiple chapters? Will each site have the same features? Or will the feature set diverge across the chapters? And how different will the theme be for each chapter?
It was interesting because when the Phase 2 team asked these questions, despite the knowledge that we had of our audience, going into it, we felt like we knew all of this. Like, national content, of course, is better than the local content, and we want that to appear. But after doing some of the workshops that Olivia described during the discovery phase, we realized that we had to change some of our assumptions that we made early on to be able to produce an end product that would work for everyone. So in terms of chapter content sharing, yes, there's some content that our local chapters produce that we absolutely want to show on the national site because it's valuable and our audience comes to the national site looking for that information. But we don't want everything. Some of the stuff from 2012 can stay on the chapter sites or be removed in the content audit. In terms of the content that we produce and publish content daily. And that's really beneficial for some of those chapters that don't make regular updates to their site. So we wanted to find a way to push our content through to the chapter sites so that if somebody bypassed the national site and say went to atlanta.score.org, they were seeing that it was regularly updated with new and fresh content. In terms of editorial responsibilities, again, we wanted to have some control over what the chapter sites could do, but we wanted to give them the freedom and the ability to make changes, add their own content, and manage their own sites. We all wanted the same features, and in terms of the theme, presenting that unified brand was really important to us. But again, we wanted to give them the ability to move things around and present local content in a way that maybe we hadn't considered, but wanted to make sure it's always on brand.
So, this led.
So the decision architecturally for the chapter sites was to go with the organic groups module. And this is because of the content sharing primarily. And that this allows content, so each chapter becomes a quote-unquote group, and content can belong to one group or multiple groups, including the national site, which is its own group. And this is combined with the Perl module, which is sort of an API module that allows you to intercept incoming domain requests, because each chapter has its own subdomain, like atlanta.score.org. And so the Perl module allows you to listen to the requests coming in from each subdomain and route it to the appropriate organic group and show the appropriate content to that site. And the big benefit here is that everything lives in the same database. When you have 320 sites, having each one have its own installation of Drupal is just it would get unwieldy. And especially sharing content among all of the sites, it really makes sense to keep it within a single database. And there is a module that I wanted to address that's called the domain module, and we did not decide to go with that because actually the full name of the module is domain access, and we're not actually restricting access control on the content. And just based on that module came with some assumptions on how it would be restricting content, and it actually made more sense to go with a custom implementation based on the Perl module and some custom code that used organic groups for the access control.
Thanks. So let's talk about the theme for a second. So when we were, as I said, our approach in all of this was to take the national site and based on that, iterate and figure out what needed to be different for chapters as we were going through it. So when we would design the site, what we came up with was sort of this, like, what was the same? So chapters needed the same basic style, the same color scheme. It was also, when you looked at the chapter sites, they had the same sort of regions and blocks, the content bands that we use, all the same. And the same templates. They had workshops and landing pages and all of the same things we did for the national site. But what was different was what I like to call the local flavor. There were some specific things that the chapters needed to add to their site to let their users know, what areas they served. And their contact information, of course, was different. And sometimes the chapters had unique content needs, and so they had to add menu items. Of course, all their social media presence was customized to the chapter, and they had their own site. Those needed to be customized. They have their own sponsors, which needed a presence on the site, and a newsletter in terms of what was happening. So when we start with the header, we kind of started to break down where these areas were. And so these are examples of two chapters here. And you can see with Chicago how they were able to add some menu items. You can see the areas where the chapter name is there, and they have the ability to add the areas served, because a lot of the SCORE chapters serve a much larger area. Like DC isn't just in DC. It's all of Northern Virginia, and I believe parts of Maryland as well. Yeah. And then you can see that Chicago has a consulting page that they added to theirs as well. And then with the footer, the same thing. A lot of the contact information, you can see our sponsors changed, as well as the ability to change navigation. So how this was implemented.
So from a technical perspective on the back end, it would be extremely unwieldy to try to manage 300 different menus. And so what we used is on the group edit page, the chapter edit page, there's a section to override menus for the header and the footer. And so you can actually go in and you can either keep the menu links as they are for the national site, or you can go in and enter in an alternate title and URL, or add a new menu item using a group of fields. And there's some pre-process logic that pre-processes the menu. and uses that alternate version that's overridden for that chapter.
So again, I mean, this is a relatively easy way for someone to go in and edit a menu without having to understand how Drupal menus work. So some other customizations we gave chapter. The local content that they would add from their chapter would appear first in search results and listings. They actually had the ability to toggle off national content if this was a chapter that was especially prolific and produced a lot of content unto themselves. Since they didn't want the national content there, they wanted their own. They could suppress that in the admin area. And then we provided a constant contact API on the site, which pulled all the chapters manage their events in constant contact, and so it would just pull that in so they wouldn't have to enter the event twice. So now the event is in the content type in Drupal, and it gets all the meta tags, and it shows up, and we get lovely SEO, and it's not out in constant contact, but the administrators don't have to do double entry. And so this is sort of the picture of what the chapter sites look like. So as you can see, it's very much on brand. They have all the same sort of pre-populated content bands and paragraphs when they first come to their site that the national site has, so that if they don't have a lot of time to customize, they still have a fully fleshed out site. One thing I didn't mention before, but it's very important, the primary navigation never changes from site to site. It is always find a mentor, take a workshop, and browse the library. Chapters can also have limits as to how much they can customize the other menus, because we don't want to get into a similar situation where you have the information overload and too many navigation options. So we give them a little flexibility to customize to meet their needs, but not sort of shoot themselves in the foot, and very much stay on brand. Another one. So here's an example of another one, and I wanted to point out for the content bands. So one of the things that if I'm sure you all memorized it, but when you went to the SCORE homepage and initially when we looked back in 2015, just about any sort of social media channel you could imagine, the logos were in the header. And it was just taking up a lot of space and clutter. And so what we did is we moved it to the footer. But some of the chapters felt that their social presence was way more important than the site itself, and they wanted it up front or above the fold, as we've all heard. So we have a social media content band that we allowed them to turn on, which automatically shows up under the hero area of the page. And a compare-contrast between the two. And so I want to ask Candace, how many chapters did you have that kind of went rogue before this and had their own site and didn't use the template?
When we started the project, we had about 30 chapter websites that weren't using the SCORE-approved Drupal template. So these were 30 sites that, again, were off doing their own thing with crazy domain names that we had no control over. And again, weren't on brand, weren't presenting the same kind of content and information that we wanted them to present to the audience.
And how many are left after the redesign?
Right now, we have about 5 that are all committed to convert over by September 30th. So again, we started this project in 2015. We didn't launch until mid-2016. And so a year later, for us to have almost 100% adoption from volunteers is a huge success for us.
Yeah, and so that's one of the things that we want to emphasize is looking at all the different users of the system by working with the volunteers throughout the process. As administrators, we were able to actually get them to, Candace worked very hard to get them to come on board. So going to let Candace talk about some of the other results that SCORE is seeing based on this design. And this is my favorite thing ever, and so I had to put it all really big.
Yes, as a marketer, of course, this is a metric that is core to what I do. Our website conversion is up 26% year over year, which means we are driving more people to take a workshop service or consume our free mentoring from the website, which is huge for us. And we continue to see gains year over year. Beyond that, our website traffic is up in visits, unique visitors, and page views, which again is something that my performance is measured on and something that makes me happy as a marketer. We want to see those numbers continue to grow. And it's, I think, in any website redesign project, you anticipate seeing some declines with the change from one site to another, but we were able to not only maintain, but see improvements in a lot of our key metrics. In terms of some feedback, we do continue to collect feedback from all of our stakeholders. And this is a quote from one of our volunteers just saying, "We're very pleased with the new website. The rollout went smoothly. Can't thank you enough for your professionalism and patience through the process." And one thing I didn't touch on to encourage adoption and buy-in throughout the project, we did select a team of volunteers that served as our volunteer task force. And in selecting this task force, I selected the most vocal and opinionated people that I could find to sort of guide the process and let us know what they thought of the site. And the logic behind that is if we could convince the naysayers and get them to participate in this process with us, we could potentially turn them into advocates, which is what we did. They're now promoters of the site and go out and challenge other volunteers to rethink their thoughts about the SCORE templates and recommended processes, which really helped with adoption. And then in terms of the rollout, we worked with them every step of the way, helping answer their questions and create training to help them understand the new site. From our clients, we use Usabilla, which I'll talk about in a minute, but there's just, you may have noticed a little feedback tab at the top of any of the screenshots that you saw of the new site. We added that module to the site so that people could just click on it and either give us feedback on a particular area of a page or just give us general feedback on the website. That's been really helpful in understanding how what our clients think of the changes and how they're navigating the site and what pages they find most useful. So in terms of advice from SCORE, because you've heard a lot about what our process was, what does this mean for you? What I would recommend is to ground all decisions in data. This was crucial for our team, and I think crucial for the success of this project, in that we used Google Analytics. We used feedback surveys from Constant Contact and Usabilla and any other data we could get our hands on to inform the project. Use whatever tools are at your disposal to understand user behavior. Olivia, you mentioned TreeJack, which again...
Yeah, so with TreeJack, we used it to test the IA just to make sure before we actually went in there and implemented the menu system and stuff that we were providing something that people could actually use. These are, as Candace said, they are using Usabilla and Optimizely. Constant Contact they continue to use for surveys, as well as Google Analytics. And one thing when we talk about the data is it was a mix of both the quantitative and the qualitative, because we did talk to people and really kind of get more of the feeling, and we got to experience firsthand some of the anger and frustration from people with the current site, so that we knew kind of how to help them get through it. And so finally,
my last recommendation is to find a true partner. This is my shameless plug for Phase 2, but they really were a true partner in this whole process. We went into the project with, I think, a very clear direction of what we wanted the site to look like, and they challenged those ideas, and they worked with us to really understand the problems that we were facing with the old website and to design a solution that would work for us, not just at launch, but long term and thinking about the future. So if you can find somebody like that during your RFP process or for your vendor interviews, or definitely look for somebody that's going to work with you throughout the process to really understand your needs.
And next steps.
In terms of next steps, I like to break stuff, so we're going to continue testing and improving the site. We do use Optimizely on the site for A/B testing, so we're testing the copy that we have on the main menu. We're testing landing page layouts and where we place different information, and we'll use that information in working with Jesse and the support team to help make additional changes to the site. Again, every decision we make is going to be grounded in data. So our volunteers are very vocal. I continue to receive emails daily from them on what they like and what they don't like. We'll use that information, our client feedback from Isabella, Google Analytics to help continue to refine what we're presenting on the site. And then, of course, it's time for the next redesign. Maybe not
I know
now.
2015.
We'll give it a little bit of time.
Long time ago. So, a quick plug.
Yes. Again, talking about trying to stay with the times, one of our offerings is a small business success virtual conference. So if you've ever thought about starting a small business, know a friend that's starting a business or is a business owner, I invite you to visit our site, visit the workshop page where you can find not only our old virtual conferences, but also any events that we have coming up in the future. Everything that you see on score.org is free. So I recommend you take advantage of it in whatever role you're in.
Cool. So I had a blank slide on accident. Also plug Jesse's speaking later today. So you get to go see him.
2 o'clock.
2 o'clock, thank you. So questions?
Yes, you talked a lot about workshops. Can you discuss a little bit more about who's in those and what those accomplished?
Sure. Yeah. So we sort of tailored them. They were a little different depending on the phase of the project we were on. When we kicked off, it was the whole project team on the phase 2 side, and then any sort of executive stakeholder at SCORE. So while we were working primarily with Candace and the marketing team, they brought in other people who would have some sort of who might have objections to any of the things that were being done. We didn't bring the volunteers in the very first one because we wanted to try to just get a sense for what SCORE was trying to do as an association, but it was phase 2 and the executives. We went through a design exercise where we did some pre-work ahead of time and got feedback on different designs, and then we went through to get gut check reactions from just a purely design standpoint and from an experience of a homepage, how SCORE reacted to different things. We did feature sort of, not really feature planning, we weren't in that, but just sort of like pie in the sky, what do you want the website to be for you, just to get a sense of where they were in alignment, where they weren't, and some interesting times on where they weren't. And moving on from there, some smaller working sessions, a lot of small working sessions, just working through some of the design aspects in terms of labeling and groupings. And then as we moved into the build, we would have in-person sprint planning and prioritization where we got big index cards on the board, and Candace and her team would kind of horse trade with each other on what was most important to them and that sort of thing. So it was very, very collaborative throughout the whole process. Yes. I don't know who raised first.
Okay. I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about your user testing process. You mentioned a number of users from the people who are actually managing your chapters, those audiences, your national audiences. How did you also mentioned your volunteer board, how did you incorporate all of their different feedback as you were building out this site?
So for the volunteers, they were actually able to sort of see things as they progress. So getting feedback on wireframes on early sitemap, which that was the meeting where before you even start, this is all wrong. I was like, okay, thanks. For the end users, we actually put that's mostly was around the tree jack that we used for them. Although some volunteers did answer it, but we just put the link to the tree jack survey on the SCORE website and had it up, and we had I want to say we had, each time we put it up, a good solid 50 to 75 people actually complete it all the way through, not abandon it, provide good feedback. And so it was a mix of sort of the remote feedback and in-person, virtual meetings, because the volunteers are all over the country. So, did that help?
Beyond like user-based functional site editing, what level of governance have you established, and how do you enforce that with the chapters?
It's a good question, and it's an ongoing challenge. I think I have a content team that I work with that goes in and just periodically checks definitely all of the content that surfaces through the national site. And we have a field team that communicates with the chapters in terms of what they can and cannot do. And so if we see something that's out there that shouldn't be, because everybody's on the template now, we can just go in and unpublish it and then have those discussions when it's done. But, I think in any project like this, it's always a challenge. We had one of our webmasters who does know coding somehow go in and break the CSS, and I visited their site and I saw like red font everywhere, and that's a phone call and discussions. We've basically built website policies into our standard operating manual. And then we're constantly communicating around it. So anytime we make a change to the website, we talk about how this affects the chapters, not only what they're able to do, but also what they shouldn't do with it. So I think it's something that we're constantly improving.
So seeing how successful you were with unifying your IA, which in itself I think is very cool, did you find that the need for an actual successful search experience kind of has diminished over time because you've simplified so much really what your target audience is primarily seeking?
No. And
we didn't talk about that, but the search was really bad before.
It was really bad. And I think because of just the sheer amount of content that we produce on a regular basis, not only that, but all of our mentors, we have a network of over 10,000 volunteers that provide mentoring. And we have encouraged all of them to create visible profiles so that people can see the breadth and depth of knowledge that we offer. So people are still finding new ways to search for information. The navigation definitely simplified it, but then I think in simplifying it just made them ask different questions, which caused them to do different searches. So we've seen a change in the search terms, and people are searching now for mentors that they found on a previous search, and they're trying to get back to that profile because new profiles are popping up, and based on the expertise that they're looking for, they're using the search for that. They're searching for new authors or content that they've seen on the site. Search is still as critical and used just as often. It's just different search queries.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
You had a question up there?
With your content editors at the different chapters, what is the experience look like for them editing content? How does it, are there different roles per chapter? Is that how it's how is it divvied up? Like when somebody in one chapter creates content, how is their content just ending up on their chapter and not everyone else's? How is that?
It's one role pretty much. There isn't a complicated workflow from the chapter standpoint, but because their permissions are associated with the group, they can't actually do any damage to other like they can when they go in there to create the content, it's automatically like for administrators at the national team, they have this list of all the chapters on every single content type. When they go to enter it for the chapters, they don't even see that it's hidden. It just automatically is for theirs.
Yeah.
So that's you can't enter the group module or that organic groups.
Yeah, so from a back-end perspective, on the content administration page, when you visit a chapter site, there's actually a modification to the query that actually restricts the content to the chapter. And so the administrator that has access to only that chapter only sees the content that they can edit. But from when a user has access to the national site, they actually have a list of the chapters, and they can actually edit content for any of the chapters if they have that level of access.
Okay. Annie, did you? Oh.
I was just going to ask what TreeJack was, but it sounds like it's just a survey.
So Optimal Sort is a company that offers online usability evaluation tools, and they have TreeJack, which is sort of an IA test. They have Optimal Sort for card sorting, and two other ones that I'm just blanking on right now. First click testing is Chalkmark, and then they have a research gathering tool, but it's super easy to set up. It is very robust in terms of the metrics you get back from it. It's relatively inexpensive, and I've actually heard from several people over the years that it's actually fun to engage with to take the test. So it's definitely something that if you can use it. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I think
You
you were
okay?
first. I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I was just, the headers, the way that you got them down to the 3 and the idea of ask, connect,
Yes.
and then the change over, we have problems putting things into buckets and labeling them. Can you talk a bit about that evolution?
Sure. Can I?
Yeah, I mean, if you want to. I mean, I think a lot of it was just we were really kind of caught up in sort of the messaging and what Score could offer, and we got a little too carried away. And so that's, why we put it in front of real people looking for information to bring us back down to earth. And we're just kind of like, it is what it is. It's mentors. This is the section where all the and this is so. I mean, Candace can speak a little bit more if she has any.
And you asked about the workshops earlier. That was one of the workshops that we did where it was just the Phase 2 team and our internal team, and we thought we had one understanding of what it is that we do, and we were able to boil it down into Ask, Learn, and Connect. But that's where TreeJack really came in handy, because we put that in, we added some questions around what you might find under each of those headers, and had people go through those quizzes, and they got everything wrong. Not wrong, but it's they were going to different sections looking for information that was just not where we thought to put it.
Right.
So it was one way to validate or to prove that our thinking was way off. And again, through the use of surveys and other tools, we were able to just come up with find a mentor, take a workshop, browse the library, which we again tested, and that test was much more successful. So I think it's an iterative process where you just have to keep pinging your various audiences to figure out what they need. I'm sorry, Jen.
I was just to say on the feedback, whether it's surveys or users or volunteers and things like that, do you view the results that you're getting and the feedback that you're getting as modifying current things, or are you using it more as like, hey, when we do a redesign, we're going to incorporate all of these things? Because we have I can say like in certain websites, you want to keep the familiarity, but, I didn't think that they would want that aspect out. So I'm going to add a little thing, or is it just sort of collecting a lot of information and then redeveloping entire structures?
But there are some changes that we get from the feedback that are easier to implement. changing the marketing copy here, or hey, I think this button would look better at the top of the page than at the bottom. And that's where our use of Optimizely really comes in handy, because we're able to test some of that feedback, where we get the feedback from our client or our volunteers, and it's like, hey, that seems like a simple enough change, something we can test and Optimizely. Let's do this A/B test and see if people respond to it. But then there are other suggestions that we get that are larger lifts, I think, for the support team and the developers, where this isn't a 1 or 3 story points kind of change. This is something that could drastically affect the entire site. So I think we always keep sort of that backlog of things that we want to consider for the redesign. That helps. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Can you show the slide where you had the comparison of the similarities and differences?
Absolutely. For between the 2 chapters?
The 2 sites, the old Drupal 6 and the Drupal 8. Wait,
Is that it? This one?
this one?
It was a listing.
Oh.
You kept the same versus.
Oh, I think. Hold on. Everybody shut their eyes so they don't get seasick. This one? No. This one?
Yeah, that one.
Yes. So that's comparing the national site versus the chapter sites. We had, for the chapters, we wanted to give them the ability to manipulate the header and the footer and the menus and placement of the social links.
So you mentioned giving them the ability to manipulate the header and the footer. Does that include your global header, find a mentor? No.
No.
That always links to national content. That goes back to your chapter content, or can they control the content using that header structure?
That's a great question. I don't know if everybody heard it. She basically said in the main menus, yes, find a mentor, take a workshop, browse the library. Does that lead to national content or chapter content? It does lead to chapter content. When the chapter site first launches, we build a default page that is the same as what we have on the national website, but we do give them the ability to edit that page to fit their local market. So we have some chapters that all of their mentors have a score profile, which means they have a headshot, they have a well-written bio, and all of the information that we require for their profiles. Then we have some chapters where all of their mentors are camera shy, they don't want to be on the website. And so for those chapters, we want to give them the flexibility to control what they have on that landing page. So they can't edit the content for each of those pages, they just can't change those menu items.
And along a similar question, you mentioned shutting down the content access by chapter once you're in the admin panel and you see all that. How would a chapter editor then access national content if they wanted to use that on their chapter site?
So it's there by default, and
Okay.
so it's sort of set up to where there's different types. So all the national workshops and advice are available, and they can turn that off in some instances, so it's not there.
Mm-hmm.
But it's from the site visitor experience. You're not leaving to go to the national site. It's just pulling that content into the chapter experience. So the chapter admins really don't have to do anything to get national content. It's there for them. They can choose to not show it, but it's there. It's the push the other way that's much more locked down in terms of the chapter content being available on the national site. It's very limited as to which content types and that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Okay.
And we're at the end of our time.
Yes.
Do we have any other questions? Thank you.